Welcome to the Part S channel. Today we explain Prophets Kings 1 chapter 13 in a clear and simple way, step by step. You are watching an explainer today that dives into what I can only describe as a bizarre, incredibly dramatic, and ultimately tragic biblical narrative. Honestly, it reads right out of a tense psychological thriller. Now, to give you just a really quick bit of context before we actually start walking through the text itself, here is where we are in the story. The kingdom of Israel has just recently split into two entirely different factions. King Jeroboam is now the guy ruling the northern kingdom, and he has a problem. He wants to stop his people from traveling south to the temple in Jerusalem to worship because, well, he's worried that might threaten his new political power. So what does he do? He builds his own unauthorized, completely rogue altar in a city called Bethel. And there is some heavy irony here, because Bethel literally translates to house of God in Hebrew. So placing a corrupt man-made altar in the house of God is deeply ironic and really sets up the tragedy we're about to see. That is exactly where our chapter begins today, perfectly setting the stage for a massive showdown.
Right at the very heart of this story from 1 Kings chapter 13 is a terrifying, really thought-provoking question. What actually happens when a true prophet believes a deadly lie? We are going to look closely at every single verse today to uncover exactly who did what, where it all went down, and why a story that starts out with such bold, fearless obedience ends in a shocking supernatural tragedy. We're going to see faith, deception, and the absolute strictness of divine command all collide in the span of a single day. As we move step by step through this chapter together, I want you to just keep in mind how incredibly high the stakes are when a person is tasked with carrying a direct, unalterable message from the divine.
Okay, let's dive right into verse 1, where we are immediately introduced to two deeply contrasting figures. Picture this scene. On one side, you have this bold, unnamed prophet who is acting purely on divine orders. On the other side, you have the corrupt King Jeroboam, and he is standing right by his illicit altar in Bethel, literally getting ready to burn incense. The text tells us that, driven by the word of the Lord, this prophet comes all the way from Judah, which is the southern kingdom, marching right up into hostile territory at Bethel. Now, in the Hebrew text, he is called an Ish Ha-Elohim. An Ish Ha-Elohim, or man of God, isn't just any title. It's a specific term used for a prophet who is carrying a very direct, unalterable message straight from God. And he arrives at the exact tense moment King Jeroboam is standing there making his offering, basically guaranteeing this is going to be a highly public, explosive confrontation.
To really grasp the sheer speed at which this whole tragedy unfolds, we need to map out the sequence of events on this fateful day. It's wild to think about, but everything we are reading about happens over the course of just a few intense hours. It starts with a bold public confrontation and ends in absolute ruin. Right now, we are in the morning phase of the timeline, right at the moment of that initial confrontation. The Ish Ha-Elohim has just arrived from Judah. His journey is fresh, his instructions are crystal clear in his mind, and his resolve hasn't even been tested yet by the crazy trials that are waiting for him by sundown.
So, let's look at verses 2 and 3. The man of God bursts onto the scene with this highly specific prophecy, and he directs it straight at the altar itself. Notice this really fascinating detail. He doesn't even speak to the king at first. He just completely ignores Jeroboam's royal authority and talks to the stones. He predicts that a future king from the house of David, named Josiah, or Yoshiyahu in Hebrew, which beautifully means God supports, will sacrifice the false priests right there on that very spot. He goes even further and adds that human bones will be burned upon it. Now you have to understand, in ancient Israel, burning human bones on an altar was the ultimate, most horrifying desecration of a sacred space imaginable. And to prove that his words are absolute truth, he gives them a sign right there on the spot. He declares that the altar will split completely apart and all its ashes will violently pour out onto the ground.
Moving into verses 4 through 6, we see these immediate, miraculous signs that completely validate the prophet's words and instantly flip the power dynamic on its head. As you can imagine, King Jeroboam is absolutely furious at the disrespect. He points his hand directly at the prophet and shouts, "Seize him!" But the moment he does, the very hand he stretches out suddenly shrivels up. It goes completely paralyzed and stiff. He literally can't even pull it back to his side. And at that exact second, boom, the altar violently splits apart and the ashes pour out, exactly as the man of God predicted. Just like that, the proud king goes from commanding violence to helplessly begging for mercy. He actually pleads with the man of God to intercede and pray for him to the Lord. The prophet does, and amazingly, the king's hand is fully and miraculously restored.
Now we hit verses 7 through 10. The king is terrified, but he's also profoundly grateful, right? So he offers the man of God hospitality and a really rich reward. And in the ancient Near East, you have to remember that accepting a meal from someone was a massive deal. It was a sign of fellowship, peace, and forming an alliance. But despite this incredibly enticing offer, the man of God firmly refuses. He cites his absolute, unbending divine orders regarding this mission. He explains it super clearly. God commanded him not to eat bread, not to drink water, and not to even return on the same road he used to get there. This is a mission of strict, uncompromising purity. Leave no trace, accept no favors. So remaining completely true to his word, the prophet turns around and takes a completely different road back home toward Judah.
Just when you think the man of God has successfully completed this super dangerous mission and is safely on his way home, a brand new character enters the scene. Verses 11 through 14 introduce us to an older, local prophet, a Navi Zaken in Hebrew. This Navi Zaken lives right there in Bethel. His sons come home and tell him everything that just happened. They tell him about the split altar, the shriveled hand, the bold prophecy, the whole shebang. The old man is deeply intrigued. He immediately asks his sons which road the man of Judah took. He saddles up his donkey, chases after him with total urgency, and eventually finds the exhausted prophet just sitting under an oak tree, resting. He walks up and asks, "Are you the man of God who came from Judah?" And our weary prophet simply replies, "I am."
This brings us to the absolute climax of our story in verses 15 through 18. The old prophet invites the man of God home to eat. Now, the man of God gives him the exact same firm refusal he just gave the king. "I cannot eat or drink here. God specifically forbade it." But then the old prophet does something shocking. He deliberately and maliciously lies. He looks at him and says, "Well, I too am a prophet, just like you are, and an angel spoke to me with a new word from the Lord, telling me to bring you back to eat and drink." It is a stunning, manipulative deception. And what's amazing is that the biblical text makes absolutely sure we, the readers, know the truth. It adds this one chilling, unmistakable parenthetical note right at the end of the verse. But he was lying to him.
Verse 19 tells us the devastating result of this deception. Tragically, the man of God just drops his guard. I mean, think about it. He survived the wrath of a king, he refused royal bribes, but he makes the fatal mistake of letting a secondary voice, someone who seems like a trusted peer, a fellow prophet, contradict the direct, unmistakable word of the Lord he had already received himself. He believes the lie. He turns his back on his strict instructions, goes right back to the old man's house in Bethel, and sits down to eat bread and drink water. He breaks the one clear, unambiguous rule God gave him for this entire mission.
Now we see a twist of bitter, dramatic irony as we read verses 20 through 22. While they are sitting right there at the dinner table sharing this forbidden meal, the actual word of the Lord comes through. But it comes through the lying prophet. God speaks through the very deceiver who caused the problem to announce the man of God's doom. The old prophet suddenly cries out that because the man of God defied the original command and came back to eat and drink, he is going to face a terrible consequence. His body will not be buried in the tomb of his ancestors. And in ancient Israelite culture, being buried with your ancestors wasn't just a tradition, it was a matter of ultimate honor and eternal peace. To be denied this was considered a severe, tragic, and highly public judgment.
What happens next in verses 23 to 25 is incredibly surreal. The bizarre, highly specific details prove this wasn't just some random accident or a wild feeding frenzy by a hungry animal. It was a deliberate act of divine judgment. After the meal, the doomed man of God saddles his donkey and leaves. Out on the road, a lion meets him and strikes him down. But the lion kills him and just stops right there. It doesn't eat the body. It doesn't even attack the donkey, which is naturally a prey animal. Instead, the fearsome predator and the timid donkey just stand perfectly still, side by side, right next to the lifeless body in the middle of the road. It is a completely unnatural, eerie scene, entirely engineered by God to send a clear message. As we continue into verse 25, we see the immediate effect this has on the public. I mean, imagine walking down the road and seeing this. The eerie stillness of the predator standing peacefully next to its prey and the victim creates this profound sense of awe and terror. This is an impossible tableau, an absolute spectacle. The local people who pass by immediately run to report it. They carry the news of this strange, terrifying sight straight back into Bethel, which is, of course, the very city where the old lying prophet lives and where the disobedience just took place.
In verses 26 through 28, the news reaches the old prophet. The man who caused this entire mess instantly knows exactly what happened. He says it is the man of God who defied the word of the Lord. He saddles up his own donkey, goes out to the road, and finds the supernatural scene exactly as the travelers reported it. The lion is still standing there, the donkey is still standing there. Driven by what must have been just an overwhelming sense of psychological guilt and crushing remorse, he retrieves the unbroken body, confirming the judgment, and brings it back to the city to bitterly mourn the man he completely deceived.
Reading verses 29 through 31, we see the truly solemn and heartbreaking aftermath of all this. The lying prophet takes full responsibility for the burial, seemingly attempting to offer the highest honor possible to make some sort of amends. He places the man of God in his own personal tomb. They mourn over him, weeping and crying out, "Oh, my brother!" And then, the old prophet issues his very striking, specific command to his sons. He says, "When I die, bury me in the grave where the man of God is buried. Lay my bones right beside his bones." He's forever linking his own fate and his final resting place with the man of God he tragically tricked.
So why does he want his bones laid exactly next to the man of God's? Well, verse 32 gives us the profound answer. Through this horrible tragedy, the old prophet acknowledges without a shadow of a doubt that the fallen man of God's initial mission was absolute truth. He tells his sons that the message declared against the altar in Bethel and all the shrines in Samaria will certainly, without a doubt, come to pass. By having his bones rest intimately next to the true prophet's bones, he is basically leveraging the holiness of the Ish Ha Elohim. He's hoping to protect his own remains when that future king, Yoshiyahu, eventually comes to dig up and desecrate the graves of the false priests. Finally, we look at verses 33 and 34 to see the ultimate outcome for King Jeroboam. You would really think this incredible series of supernatural spectacles, the withered hand, the split altar, the restored hand, and then a lion supernaturally refusing to eat a prophet, would completely shake the king to his core and change his behavior. But no, Jeroboam completely ignores the massive warning. The text tells us he did not change his evil ways at all. He just continued the very sins that seal his dynasty's doom, indiscriminately consecrating literally anyone who wanted to be a priest for the high places. This stubborn, willful rebellion is what ultimately leads to the utter destruction of his royal house.
Before we wrap up today, let's do a quick recap. A man of God bravely delivered a true prophecy to a corrupt king and witnessed incredible miracles. But tragically, he lost his life on the way home simply because he listened to a deceptive secondary voice rather than holding fast to God's direct command. The key simple idea here is all about obedience and the absolute nature of truth. The man of God knew the truth directly from the source, but he allowed a lie to lead him astray, and it cost him everything. Meanwhile, Jeroboam saw the truth right in front of his own eyes, but stubbornly refused to change his ways. So what's the practical life lesson for us? It's to hold fast to the clear truths and commands we know in our hearts are right, and not be swayed by convenient lies or bad influences, no matter who they come from or how authoritative they sound. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.